now by Andrew Mitchell MP, who of course was former International Development Secretary and who worked also with Jo Cox specifically on Syria, and with Mina Al-Oraibi, the Iraqi-British journalist and political analyst, and from New York by Justin Forsyth from UNICEF. And of course, Justin Forsyth, just to bring you in right straight at the top, Brendan, her husband, worked very, very closely with you, and you presumably also knew Jo.
I knew Jo very, very well. I think I gave her first big job at Oxfam when we all worked together on things like Darfur and maternal mortality, on making trade fair. And she's one of the best. And I, as you say, I also worked with her husband, Brendan, at Save the Children. Jo will be missed by everyone in the whole humanitarian and development community. She gave her life to our cause in her fight on Darfur and maternal mortality, more recently on refugees. But she was also an amazing mum. I know her two kids very well. And, you know, this is a terrible loss.
Well, Justin, we'll come back to you in a moment, but let me then just talk to you, Mina, because you knew her because you were both leadership or young leaders selected at the World Economic Forum back in 2009 and remained friends thereafter. Tell us about how you became friends.
Well, Jo was wonderful. Everyone is in shock because she's one of those people that the minute you meet her, you feel like you've known her for the longest time. Very open, very warm, and very opinionated, and says it, but opinionated in a way that's never hurtful, but really had strong views and principled views. I met her, of course, before she was an MP, and she was just beginning to think about what it means to be in public office. Through the Young Global Leaders, we met in places like London, but also in different parts of the world where they would have conferences for us. And she was passionate about the Middle East, so quite often we talk about the Middle East, but also she really cared about women standing up, being involved in policy and also development.
Well, now, Andrew Mitchell, it's interesting because the transition from being an NGO activist and really doing stuff in the field to sitting on those green benches and attempting to make an impact in Parliament is a very different thing. And yet she did in a very short period of time.
Yes, she did, and she was incredibly good at it. She brought all the passion and energy and experience she got from the NGO and charity world, and she expressed it so well on those green benches. And very early on, just after she'd been elected, she came to see me, and you know, for a young, new Labour person cooperating with a wicked old Tory on something she cared passionately about, was unusual. But she did it, and together we set up the all-party Friends of Syria group, and her vision, her experience, her dynamism, her energy infected all of us who have been involved in this campaign. And it is a terrible loss, not only, of course, for her constituents and for Westminster and for Parliament, but also for those two little children who used to come into Portcullis House and have tea with her during the week.
And Mina, Syria was something which you worked with her on, and you were constantly feeding her material, particularly what you were hearing as a journalist. How did that work?
She got her information from so many different sources, but yeah, the last time we were in touch was actually on the 24th of May when there was a statement on Syria, and she was adamant that people can't be lazy or say that there's fatigue from Syria and there's too much, that there had to be a rethink of the strategy. She, at a time when it was not cool to be thinking so much about new ideas for strategy and solving problems in Syria, she made such an effort with, of course, Andrew, to really remind people that there are lives being lost. She took a really strong position on refugees and child refugees. And so she would be in touch, very direct in her emails, and say, what about this particular issue? And of course, she wrote so eloquently, and she wrote some of the strongest pieces on Syria.
Justin, from the point of view of somebody who's led Save the Children and had a senior office in Oxfam, and therefore, as we've said earlier, you knew both Jo and her husband, Brendan. I'm wondering, actually, how NGOs feed into Parliament and whether you saw her as somebody who would take all that forward and bring it into Westminster and perhaps bend some elbows and really get change.
Well, she was tough, Jo, as well, and determined and relentless sometimes, and that was part of her. But she also had a kindness and a grace. I mean, one of the things that all of us that knew her is her energy and zest for life, but this grace and kindness in her heart. She was, everyone will be saying tonight how kind she is, and she was in her heart the most kind person. She was a real humanitarian. She didn't only campaign for these humanitarian causes. She lived her life like that. She brought together her friends. Every year, Brendan and Jo have this amazing party on the Wye. They live on this boat on the Thames, and they have people there for dinner too. And she pulls people together from all different walks of life. I mean, Andrew is completely right. She was Labour, he was Conservative, but they had a common cause, and she did that all through her life. On small and big issues, and I think it's how she did things. And I think for me,
did you use
Jo,
her in Parliament, or had you already gone to the UN by then?
No, definitely. I don't think we used her. Maybe she used us, but we both ways round. At Oxfam, at Save the Children, she knew how to make things happen. She knew when to be tough, when to give ground. She was very clever in terms of her strategic thinking, and she'd worked in the European Parliament as well as in Westminster.
Can I ask what may sound a sort of banal question, but there is America contorted with grief over what has happened in Orlando, and I'm wondering whether the killing of a British politician by gunfire has in any way made any kind of impact, where perhaps that's not so shocking as it is so deeply shocking to us.
Well, it's early days, but it has made an impact. I've seen it, Nick Kristof at the New York Times. I've seen many people from the US NGO scene, Human Rights Watch, on social media. I've had requests to do interviews on the US media, and I think, they don't know Jo, all of them, though Nick Kristof does. And he's famous in the kind of world of the New York Times and international development. But others are just shocked at this attack on democracy. And Jo is a tragedy for Brendan and for Layla and Kulin, her two little children, but it's also an attack on democracy. And I think Brendan's beautifully eloquent testimony to her and to us all to rise above this and to combat hate, but also to show love, is what she would have wanted. I think she was a person really in her heart who showed kindness and love. Right. And I think that is the way forward.
Andrew Mitchell, security. We've mentioned in the course of the programme that other MPs have, well, in one case there's been loss of life, and of course in several cases in history the loss of life. But is it now a more risky business being in public office, or is this something utterly unique and dreadful?
I think this is utterly unique and dreadful. I don't think MPs are at any greater risk than many other people who work in the public sector. And all of us get advice from our local police on how best to protect our staff and so forth in our constituencies. And I think we must rise above this, as Brendan has said, and accept that it is a one-off, uniquely horrific and devastating blow.
So, in Parliament, is now the organisation that you started, and she's not there anymore. How will her absence be marked?
Well, we will go on fighting just as hard without her as we did with her, because that's what she would want. Though it's a very big hole to fill for all the reasons that you have heard. But I think the determination and grit which she brought to the campaign to try and stop the catastrophe that has engulfed Syria will continue, and it will continue ever more forcefully because of the legacy that she has left.
And Mina, more personally, what will you miss about Jo? It's very early to ask you that, but I mean, you've lost a friend.
I think many of us have lost a friend today. I guess her kindness and also her smile, her cheer. I mean, when she really was one of those people that when she walked into the room, all attention went to her.
The pictures demonstrate a tiny, sort of very vibrant and dynamic individual.
Yeah, and of course, our thoughts are with Brendan, who only earlier today was speaking to a group of YGLs about the SDGs and his passion for development and sustainability. So, of course, we look to Brendan also to carry us with him in this journey.
Mina Al-Oraibi, Andrew Mitchell, thank you both very warmly, and Justin Forsyth too.